In 1882, a German philosopher wrote 3 words that changed Western civilization forever. 3 words that have been misunderstood, weaponized, screamed by people who never read a single page he wrote, and whispered by people who understood exactly what he meant and were terrified by it. 3 words that were not a celebration, not an atheist battle cry, not an invitation to chaos. They were a warning, the most serious, the most urgent, the most heartbroken warning a philosopher has ever issued to the human race. God is dead. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. He was born in 1844 in a small Prussian town, the son of a Lutheran pastor who died of a brain disease when Nietzsche was 4 years old. He grew up surrounded by women, his mother, his sister, his grandmother, in a household shaped entirely by Christian faith and quiet grief. He was a brilliant student, obscenely brilliant, appointed professor of classical philology at the University of Basel at 24 years old, before he had even finished his doctorate, the youngest professor in the university's history. And then, slowly, painfully, over years of reading and thinking, and being unable to stop either, he began to see something he could not unsee. The world Nietzsche was born into was built on a foundation. That foundation was God. Not just in churches, not just in theology, in everything. The idea that human life had meaning, God. The idea that there was a difference between right and wrong, God. The idea that history was going somewhere, that suffering had a purpose, that the weak would be protected, and the wicked eventually punished. All of it rested on that single foundation. And Nietzsche looked at that foundation, honestly, the way only a man who had lost his father at 4 and spent his whole life inside grief could look at something. And he saw that it was crumbling. Not because of one event, not because of one argument, but because of science, because of Darwin, because of history, because of the slow, grinding accumulation of everything the modern world had discovered, and the fact that educated people had quietly stopped believing, even if they still went to church on Sundays. So when Nietzsche wrote, "God is dead," he was not declaring victory. He was sounding an alarm. In the gay science, he writes it through the mouth of a madman who runs into the marketplace, carrying a lantern in broad daylight, screaming that he is looking for God. The crowd laughs at him, and the madman stops and says, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him." What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. And who will wipe this blood off us? The crowd goes silent. Because the madman is not crazy. The madman is the only person in the marketplace who understands what has actually happened. So what had happened? Nietzsche's diagnosis was this. For 2,000 years, Western civilization had organized everything, its morality, its meaning, its sense of purpose, its ability to endure suffering, around a single story. The story that there is a God, that He created you, that your life has an inherent purpose, that there are objective moral truths written into the fabric of the universe, that if you suffer here, it will be redeemed somewhere. And now, that story was gone. Not for everyone, not overnight, but culturally, intellectually, among the educated class that shapes how a civilization thinks. Gone. And here is the question Nietzsche could not stop asking. If the story is gone, what replaces it? Because here is what he saw coming, with a clarity that still feels prophetic today. He saw that most people would not replace the story at all. They would just keep the habits of the story, the morality, the sense of purpose, the language of meaning, while quietly hollowing them out from the inside. They would chase comfort. They would chase pleasure. They would call mediocrity contentment and call distraction happiness. He called this figure the last man. The last man does not suffer greatly. He does not dream greatly. He does not risk anything. He blinks and says, "We have invented happiness." Nietzsche considered the last man the most contemptible figure in human history. Not the villain, not the tyrant. The person who had every opportunity for greatness and chose comfort instead. So what was the alternative? This is where Nietzsche gives us the idea that defines his entire philosophy. The Ubermensch, usually translated as Superman or Overman, but both translations miss the point. The Ubermensch is not a superhero. He is not a conqueror. He is not Nietzsche's endorsement of anyone with power. A misreading that caused catastrophic damage when his sister edited his work to serve Nazi ideology after his death. A betrayal that would have destroyed him had he known. The Ubermensch is something far more personal than that. He is the person who looks at a world with no given meaning, no God, no objective morality, no cosmic purpose handed down from above. And instead of collapsing, instead of numbing out, instead of becoming the last man, creates meaning from himself, for himself, out of nothing but the raw material of his own will, his own values, his own vision of what a human life could be. Nietzsche called this the will to power. Not power over others, power over yourself. The drive to grow, to overcome, to become more than you currently are, not because God commands it, not because society rewards it, but because you have decided that this is what your life is for. And then, at the very end of this philosophy, Nietzsche asks you to do something almost impossible. He calls it amor fati, love of fate. You heard that phrase in the Marcus Aurelius episode. Nietzsche used it too, and he meant something even more extreme. He asks if you had to live your life again, every moment of it, every joy and every suffering, every humiliation and every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday and every devastating loss, exactly as it happened, forever, in an eternal loop. Could you say yes? He called this the eternal recurrence, not a cosmological theory, a psychological test. If the answer is yes, if you can look at your life and want it again, exactly as it was, then you are living with genuine meaning. You have created something worth repeating. If the answer is no, then you already know what needs to change. Nietzsche spent the last 11 years of his life insane. In January 1889, he collapsed in the street in Turin, threw his arms around a horse that was being beaten, and never recovered his mind. He died in 1900 at 55. He published most of his greatest works in the last decade before the collapse, writing with the frantic urgency of a man who knew, somewhere, that time was running out. He was almost entirely unknown during his lifetime. He sent copies of his books to people he admired and received almost no response. He wrote at one point that he was certain he would one day be understood, and that perhaps 100 years would need to pass first. He was right, because here we are, living in exactly the world he described. A world where the old story is gone and most people have not replaced it. Where comfort is mistaken for meaning. Where the last man is not a warning from a philosophy book. He is the default setting. Nietzsche does not tell you what to believe. He does not hand you a new religion or a new moral code. He does something harder. He hands you the question. Now that the old answers are gone, what are yours? Not the answers you inherited, not the answers that make people comfortable, not the answers that let you avoid the weight of actually choosing how to live. Your answers, built from who you actually are, pointed toward what you actually value, strong enough to say yes to, even if you had to live them forever. That is what Nietzsche wanted from you, not followers, people who no longer needed him. This is Philokimi. We will see you in the next one.